I'm VJ Hamilton, and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle, with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Autoimmune Reset podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist and expert in autoimmune disease. And today I'm very excited to have Louise Digby on the show. She is also a registered nutritionist and she's a women's weight loss expert. Louise is also the founder of the Nourish Method to lasting fat loss. And Louise specifically works with women who are in their 40s and 50s and eating a pretty good diet. They're training, they're doing everything they can to lose weight, but for various reasons are not able to lose weight. And Louise looks at the underlying imbalances in the body, helps to correct those so that people can lose weight naturally and also be in optimal health. So thank you so much for being here, Louise. Maybe would you add a bit more context to the introduction that I've just given about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks for a lovely introduction as well. It was a really good summary. But yeah, so I think I noticed when I was kind of in my early days of practice, when I was working with lots of different people, that the women who were in this kind of midlife stage were finding it particularly difficult to lose weight, despite being some of the most disciplined clients, and really following whatever plans I'd given them to the letter, but not really getting great results compared to other people who were coming to me for other reasons, whether it's for IBS or fatigue or whatever it might be, but also wanting to lose weight. It was the people that were focusing on their health that were getting the best results.
Yeah.
So it was kind of those combination of things that I'd noticed that made me really dig into this area and make it my area of expertise and develop my method that I use with my clients so that we can address this really troublesome time during midlife, and all of the problems that come along with the weight gain, because there's many different perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms that women struggle with, all at a time when life can be pretty chaotic because of often having children and aging parents and working full time and all those things. So really wanting to dig deeper than just creative ways to get people to lose weight in terms of eating less and exercising more. Really want to dig down into the imbalances that drive stubborn weight, that impact hormones and metabolism.
Yeah, I mean, I find it such a fascinating area as well. So, I mean, I'm sure that's one of the reasons you got into it. Do you have any kind of personal story around it, or did you just find it really interesting? And I think it is a hugely interesting area. I've had parents who have both ended up putting on weight for various different reasons. And I come across a lot of people who are really struggling with this. But did you have any family members or any experience yourself with this?
Yeah, I think I've got quite a few family members who have all kind of gained weight as the years have gone by. So many of them, when I first qualified as a nutritionist, asked me for tips and help with how to manage their weight. And again, people got very limited results, and it was frustrating, and also just really almost boring, really, because it's what you're taught is the same old, just eat less, exercise more, help people with their portion sizes, and if you can just get them in a calorie deficit and help them to do that in a way where it's going to be sustainable, then they'll lose weight. But that wasn't the experience that I had with the people that I worked with and people I tried to advise. You know, even when they were super disciplined, they just weren't getting anywhere. So, and you know, at the time I had various mentors and supervisors for my nutrition practice, and I talked to them about it, and they'd say, well, your clients are lying. They're obviously secret eaters, you know, they're maybe eating in the night. And I just didn't buy that. Obviously, you know, some people do have issues with food and may not be telling the whole truth, but you know, it just seemed like a much more pervasive problem than that.
Yeah, I mean, what would you, I mean, obviously, one of the main things that we hear is about the calorie deficit. What are the main myths that you hear about weight? Because it is really frustrating when you are trying to do everything. And I think it is a very complicated world when it comes to health, just generally now, but especially around weight. Are there any particular myths that you might see online or hear people say that you think, actually, that's just not right? And that's not what I'm seeing with my clients?
I think the biggest one is that you just need to get into a calorie deficit to lose weight. You know, it's made out like it's very black and white. And if you're in a calorie deficit, then you're definitely going to lose weight. But that's not the case. There's lots of things that need to be in place, or factors that impact fat burning over and above calorie control. You know, there's things like the thyroid. If your thyroid isn't functioning efficiently, then your metabolism is going to be slower. You're not going to be burning fat as efficiently. Um, there's lots of nutrients involved in helping your cells, your mitochondria, to actually turn your fat into fuel and burn those calories. So if you have certain deficiencies, you may not be burning fat very efficiently, or if there's damage within those mitochondria, then that can impact your fat burning as well. Our blood sugars need to be in balance. So if your blood sugars are regularly elevated, or if your insulin levels are elevated regularly, then it can be very difficult to get into fat burning mode, which is essentially where your insulin comes down low enough to allow glucagon to increase so that you can get into that fat burning mode. So none of those things are impacted by the amount of calories you're eating. And just getting into a calorie deficit isn't going to solve those issues if you've got imbalances in those areas. And, you know, none of that even touches on what causes those issues as well. And that's when we start talking about things like gut health and inflammation and toxic load. Those are the things that we should really be thinking about when we're trying to optimize our health and manage our weight in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, many of these topics that you've mentioned there are very much related to the type of things that can be imbalanced in autoimmune disease as well. And I suppose it comes down to an individual's genetic susceptibility of how this presents itself. But it's funny really that these things can come down to, well, it's looking at the root cause, isn't it? And I often find some people who have different types of autoimmune conditions will end up with weight gain. I know you mentioned the thyroid and having Hashimoto's. They can end up putting on weight and finding it very hard to lose that because of the slower metabolism. One area that I think is worth just explaining in a little bit more detail, because I know when I learned about this, when I started doing my nutrition training, I found it really fascinating, is the role of insulin. And you said that when somebody has insulin at a certain level, they're unable to burn fat. Can you talk about that in a bit more detail and how somebody might be able to practically apply that in their own life or even test for it and know if that's a factor for them?
Yeah, so basically, when your blood sugars become elevated, insulin is a hormone that is produced from the pancreas, and it's produced in response to blood sugars increasing. And insulin's job is to bring your blood sugars down. And a simplified explanation is that the way it does that is it sweeps that sugar into your cells. And then if your cells need energy, then it uses that sugar to make energy. If they don't need energy, you essentially sweep that sugar away and store it as fat. So for that reason, I kind of call insulin your fat storage hormone. And it's normal to have your blood sugars go up and down when we eat. Other things can impact your blood sugars, like stress and lack of sleep and caffeine and various other things. But the problem is when we're on this roller coaster of blood sugars, or when our blood sugars are consistently elevated, because that means that we're constantly pumping out insulin, which means we're constantly sweeping away the sugars into our cells. We don't need all that sugar, so we store it as fat. So we're not going to be burning fat if we are with raised insulin levels. Even if we're in a calorie deficit, we're going to be storing it. In terms of how you can kind of apply that information practically, we need to take steps to try and balance our blood sugars. And I always think the best place to start with that is having plenty of protein, particularly in your breakfast. And there's lots of reasons why this is helpful. Protein is best digested in the morning. So that's kind of like one of the reasons why it's more important to focus on that. But also protein, it slows down your digestion of carbohydrates. And that means that if you are eating some carbs, like some oats, for example, with your protein, you're going to have a slower release. So you're not going to get such a high spike in your blood sugars. And protein is also very satiating. So it's going to keep you fuller for longer. And the combination of being fuller for longer and managing those blood sugars is that you're less likely to get cravings later on in the day for carbs and sugars. So it helps you to make better food choices later in the day if you are eating a really good breakfast that's rich in protein. So that's a really good place to start. And of course, just thinking about your overall intake of sugar is a big factor as well. And trying to make some sensible swaps and go for unprocessed foods as much as possible. But part of the reason why I suggest starting with the protein for breakfast is because it's easier to start reducing your sugar intake when you've got plenty of protein in your diet, because you feel fuller and your blood sugars are more balanced.
Yeah, because you do find that I find it with my clients as well. When people aren't eating enough, they get hungry, and that's why they end up craving the sugar. And I know there is the fact that you can have a habit that you might go to, for example, after work, and you have something sugary. But I think for the most part, people are just feeling hungry because they haven't eaten the right food throughout the day. I mean, what would be some go-to breakfast for you if somebody's listening and is thinking, well, what would a high protein breakfast look like for me?
So eggs are a fantastic option generally. They're rich in protein, and because it's kind of a savory option, it's kind of naturally lower in sugar, or even sugar free, depending on what you have them with. So those are a really good option. One of my favorite breakfasts is a homemade granola, where you basically just mix up flaked almonds, sunflower seeds, whatever seeds you want, really, a few oats, some coconut flakes. You can mix it up with just some almond butter, maybe a little drizzle of honey, and then roast it. Really, really easy. And it makes a really delicious granola that you could have with berries. You could have it with yogurt, and it keeps you full for hours and hours.
Yeah, that's perfect. That sounds delicious as well.
Mm.
Have you got any recipes for that? I'm sure you do somewhere.
Yeah, I can probably find the link for you and send it over.
I mean, I know a lot of the time you're working with women in their 40s and 50s, and I know you mentioned it at the beginning that this is when women are going through hormonal changes, and our hormones, I know we've been talking about insulin, but our sex hormones can play a big part in this. So how do you help your clients around this age group with their weight when it comes to their sex hormones? Are there things that you're looking out for in particular?
Well, the first thing to think about is what's happening in this life stage. And there's a couple of things that are happening. One is that hormones are changing, and overall, there is a decline in your sex hormone levels over the course of up to 15 years. It can be from the age of 35. And that the hormones tend to go up and down during that time. So you might become a little bit estrogen dominant at first, and then they might kind of gradually decline after that. That decline in estrogen is part of what drives muscle loss after the age of 35 as well. And that's very significant because your muscle is metabolically active. So, it burns calories for you even when you're not working out, even when you're just sitting there or sleeping. So muscle mass is really important for weight management, but also I think recently there's been a lot of talk about how important muscle mass is just for health generally and aging well, in terms of, looking after your bones and your joints and just general longevity. So that's a big factor. And then also the decline in estrogen can be a factor in driving insulin resistance as well, which is essentially where your insulin isn't doing its job properly. Your cells aren't listening to insulin, so your body keeps producing more and more of it. And that's not good because, as we've spoken about, that's the fat storage hormone.
Yeah.
So it's like a double whammy of things that are happening. And again, part of the reason why it's so tricky is because these problems didn't happen because you're overeating or under exercising. They don't happen because of laziness or greed. It's a natural change in the body, but it's exacerbated by underlying issues like gut health, or maybe lack of strength training, or deficiencies, and all those other things that we've mentioned.
I like that you started with the fact that it's not really an indirect, it is a direct effect, but the fact that we lose muscle mass as women in that age group, and there are things that you can do to help with that from from an exercise perspective, but also from a food perspective. And I think that's where the protein makes a big difference as well, because what I find with my clients is that when they get to around 40 or 50, because of things going on in the gut, is they're finding it hard to digest protein. So in that instance, it's like, actually take the protein out of the diet. But the truth is you need more protein, don't you?
Yeah.
You answered my question, which was great. But is there anything else around that for women with their hormones and how that can affect them with weight?
The approach we normally take is all about restriction and really punishing our bodies through exercise to try and get the weight off. But for women of any age, but particularly during this life stage, we need to flip it on its head, and we actually need to take a much more nurturing, gentle approach, and not be thinking about the calories, because the workouts that burn the most calories are often the workouts that actually drive up cortisol, our stress hormone. They can be too intense, and your body can struggle to bring that cortisol level back down again after exercise. And cortisol is so disruptive to our other hormones, the sex hormones and blood sugars, our sleep, and loads of things related to health and weight management. So the typical approach of exercise is not always helpful, and toning that down and doing kind of lower intensity exercise and more focusing on strength training is one thing that we need to think about. And then from the food side of things, rather than taking the approach of restriction and cutting out food groups and cutting out fat or lowering calories or whatever it might be, instead we want to think about, what does my body need to function properly? And again, this is where we come back to really the basics. We need to have enough protein. We need to make sure properly hydrated, that there's lots of fiber and a variety of fiber in the diet. And then over and above food, we need to think about rest and allowing our bodies enough time to rest and repair. As we get older, it takes long for us to recover from exercise. So if we're working out every day in terms of doing high intensity and spin classes and all the things that a lot of people tend to go for to get the fat off, we're not going to be recovering from it very well, and we're probably going to be causing muscle damage that isn't getting repaired, because we're not allowing the recovery, but we're probably not fueling our bodies properly either. And that just accelerates the muscle decline even more. So just taking a more gentle approach and more nurturing approach is a kind of bit of a mindset shift that we have to make.
Yeah, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because I do think it's ingrained in us that you just need to train harder and you're going to see more, you're going to see better results.
Mm.
Have you, so is that what you're finding with your clients? I know it seems that you're working with clients who are already doing a lot of intense exercise. So what kind of rest prescription do you give them when you're working with a client? What can somebody do? Because I know, even I struggle with this, and I recommend rest to my clients all the time. But then when you have a busy day, or, I'm actually training for a half marathon at the moment, and rest always seems to not get prioritized, but it really should be prioritized, shouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And, it will depend on the individual and what they've got going on. And sometimes what I see is someone who is highly stressed, constantly busy. They get up, they sort the kids out, they go to work a long day, come home, sort the kids out, cook the food. And then they're off to a spin class. And then they come home and they wonder why they can't sleep. And, they're so wired because they're just constantly busy, constantly go, go, go. So for someone like that, they would most likely benefit from a much lower intensity workout in the evening. There is still a place for higher intensity stuff, but we need to think about when do we need to like bring our bodies down, bring our nervous systems kind of down into a resting mode, and when is it okay to kind of bring ourselves up a little bit. um and some of that will be dependent on your schedule. Some of it will just be dependent on what's going on for you or how high your stress levels are generally. But I think just making sure that you have a balance of some strength training, some cardio, some mobility work, ideally. This is in an ideal world, but of course, you've got to start from where you're at right now. And even if you're just doing walking or swimming or just some basic stretches, that's a good place to start, and you'll probably get more benefit from that in terms of for your hormones, um, than trying to force yourself to go out for a run every day, for example.
So if somebody is listening to this and is at that point that, because I'm working a lot with autoimmune disease, and a lot of people that will listen to this podcast may have autoimmune disease as well. I'm just wondering what you think about the 10,000 steps a day, because perhaps like strength training, if you've got arthritis, I mean, it is best to move when you have arthritis, to be honest, but maybe not being able to lift heavy weights and that type of thing. If somebody was to aim for 10,000 steps a day, do you think that's a good marker? Or do you think that's just been, a number that's been taken from no research and everybody's out there doing the 10,000 steps? Or do you think it is quite helpful to aim for that?
I think it does seem to be a number that's kind of been plucked out of nowhere. And I've definitely seen stuff that's suggested that much more than that is required. But it also depends on what else you're doing. You can do a strength workout and, not do barely any steps as part of that. There's many evenings where I'll play badminton for a couple of hours and I'm running around constantly, and that in itself might only be 4,000, 5,000 steps. But that sounds like a lot of exercise to a lot of people. So I think steps are, not always a great way to monitor things, but I do think that having a pedometer or a Fitbit or something like that, it is quite motivating when you look at your watch and you think, oh, there's only 2,000 steps for me to do my 10,000, but perhaps I'll just pop out for a 20-minute walk or something like that. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. But if you're someone who's doing your 10,000 steps every day religiously and you're not getting anywhere, it's probably because it's just a bit of an arbitrary number.
Yeah, and you need a combination, like you were saying. I mean, one of the things that I do is just I create a list of the things that I want to achieve in the week. And I just feel, if I feel like I've had a hard day or something's happened emotionally and I just need some space, or my body's really achy, I just think actually today I'm not going to be doing anything. And the next day I'm feeling really energized. That's the day I'll go for a run. And then I actually really love strength training. So if I'm feeling okay, I'll get up and do strength training. But rather than say, I have to do this every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and force my
Mm.
body to do it regardless, I think that's quite a good way to monitor it, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And I think you also got to base it on how you feel after exercise, because if you're feeling like absolutely drained after a workout, then you've probably gone a little bit too intense for what you needed at that time. Really, we should be feeling energized after a workout, or at least calm and rested if you're doing a lower intensity workout. um so if it's completely wiping you out where you've got no energy to do anything afterwards, or if you're struggling to sleep afterwards, then you need to kind of adjust what you're doing, either the time that you're doing it or the intensity.
Yeah, yeah, that's good advice. So when it comes to these underlying imbalances, which seems to be a factor in somebody's weight gain, and I know we've talked about the hormonal piece, but is there testing that you run in your clinic that can help people identify what might be the issue? And if so, which tests do you run and which do you find the most helpful when it comes to weight loss?
So we tend to run a couple of tests. One of them is a thyroid test that looks at the thyroid in much more detail than your standard doctor's tests. I'm sure it's something that you've probably spoken about before on the podcast, but essentially your doctor's tests are pretty basic and they don't always pick up thyroid issues or kind of more complex thyroid imbalances. So we always look at that, because time and time again, we have people come into the program who have been told that their thyroid's fine, it's all normal, or maybe it's just a bit borderline and they don't need to do anything. And then when we look at it in more detail, we see that actually there is a significant amount of stuff going on and we need to focus on that. So we always check that.
Yeah,
And then we always tend to do an organic acids test, which is a urine test which looks at kind of all the processes that happen in your body and the waste products that are produced as a result of that and then are eliminated through your urine. And by looking at that, you can get a really good understanding of what's going on in your gut, in terms of bacteria and yeast and digestion. You can get a good understanding of your metabolism of fats and proteins and carbs and how you make energy and how that whole process is working. You can also look at things like toxic load and liver detoxification, um, and nutrients. You get to see what nutrients your body has a high demand for, which is much more helpful than just looking at do you have a deficiency or not, because you might not have a deficiency, but your body may have a really high demand for certain nutrients because of the imbalances that you have, or it could even be a genetic kind of
yeah,
variant.
yeah. Okay, so and they're the two main ones that you look at.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah,
it gives us a really well-rounded view of what's going on. And then alongside that, we always do quite a detailed symptom analysis and medical history so that we can get an idea of, things like sex hormone imbalances, and, whether cortisol might be raised and that sort of thing.
yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, I love both those tests as well. I think they give you some really great insight into what's going on in the body. So, is there anything, if anybody's listening today, that they can do, like maybe after listening to the podcast, that they can do to help themselves when it comes to managing their weight? I know we've touched on a couple of recommendations around food and around lifestyle, but if there was a couple of things that you would suggest for somebody to do, what would they be outside of what we've already discussed?
I'm trying to think what we haven't mentioned. We obviously
Oh,
mentioned.
if you've already mentioned it, what do you think are the main things, that somebody can just take away? I know there's so much more complexity to it, but it is just nice to go away from something and just be able to implement just a small little thing to help, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the top things that I would suggest to focus on are protein, getting it particularly into breakfast, but ideally into all your meals. Um, Making sure you're getting enough sleep. We've spoken about rest, but sleep is important too. And what I see a lot of people doing is getting up an hour earlier to get a workout in and sacrificing precious sleep, when what I would suggest is that if you're not getting 8 hours sleep, don't be getting up early. You want to make sure you're getting your 7 to 8 hours as a minimum. It's so important. So that would be a big priority. And stress management as well. I can't emphasize enough how big stress is, particularly for this age group. It's a big factor in worsening hormone imbalances, driving insulin resistance, interfering with gut health, and ultimately, muscle loss as well, and just, exacerbating this whole problem of stubborn weight in this midlife stage. So I would really prioritize that.
Yeah, they're great tips. And I would say they're priorities as well. Well, thanks so much, Louise. We've loved having you on today. I know you have a free challenge, don't you? Metabolism Reset. Is that right?
So it's the Metabolism Reset. It's a 5-day challenge. It's not free, but it's not expensive either.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And I do have a discount code for your listeners as well, so that they can get 50% off, and it's just Victoria. So if they pop that in the promo code box, they'll get 50% off. But I do also have a free webinar. So that's a kind of a nice introduction and digs a little bit deeper into what we've spoken about today. And both of those things can be found on my website, which is louisedigbynutrition.com.
That's great. And apologies for making that mistake, but it's a very reasonable price and worth every penny. So definitely go and check Louise out. Thanks again for being here. I'm sure we'll do things together in the future. Thanks so much, Louise.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time. And remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.